And again, I think it's important for the listeners to know, I'm really talking about not reacting to life, but being more proactive. And I think in my past too, I tend to be like, well, whatever life gives me. Right. And it's like, life will meet me at my point of action too. Yeah. So I have being a leader in one's life is also taking responsibility, which if people really slow down that word, responsibility really only means the ability to respond.
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host, Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast, our first ever in-person Bridging Impact Podcast episode with my coach, Amy Hruby. She has done a lot of great work with myself in terms of not only just the business side of things, but how to become a better leader in terms of my professional life with BTG basketball, with the Bridging Impact Podcast, but also my personal life and shifting a lot of my mindset into ways that are more productive and help me actually, go where I want to go aspirational wise. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin. I'm really excited to be here with you all and see what comes forward in the conversation.
All right, let's do it. Let's dive right in. Yes. So with that being said, obviously our conversation is going to be a little bit different today than the typical episode, which I think is actually really special for the listeners. So one of the things that I am excited about is to talk about coaching. And instead of asking how sports made an impact in your life, I want to ask you, how has coaching made an impact on your life?
Such a great question. All good coaching comes from great questions. So that was a really good question to start me off at. So coaching has impacted my life in so many ways. I've been coached professionally now probably close to 10 years. So I've had a coach consistently. Currently my coach right now is Amber Chris, who's made a significant impact in my life. Amber, I think how it's impacted me is a coach helps me dream bigger for myself. Yeah. And, sometimes that word bigger can get bigger, better, expansive. Right. And sometimes my mindset can be very short and can be more in survival mode. And coaching's helped me be more about in a thriving mode.
Okay, so let's take that thriving mode. And can you give an example? So you've talked about having a coach for over 10 years. Let's go back to at the very early stages of when you first had a coach. Yes. Can you give an example of how your first coach helped you dream bigger in terms of aspirations and hold more space for possibility?
Yeah, so my first coach was Carrie Doubts, who was my former boss at the University of Santa Monica. And I hired her because I started a new job. And with her coaching, my income basically I was making $50,000 a year, all the way up to $75,000 a year, which is woo! But for me, $25,000 was a game changer for our family. I went from working at a nonprofit to working for a startup, and I also got 2 different title changes while I was working with her. And so she helped me see myself in a different light. So I was always such a support person, but I needed to take myself, how I was seeing myself as a support person, to more of a leader. And she really helped me with that mindset. So that made a significant difference.
So you talked about being a support person and shifting that mindset to being a leader. What was that shift like? When you felt like you were a support person, how did you feel? How were you showing up? And how did that work with your coach shift to I'm a leader?
That's another great question, Justin. I'm doing a good job. He's asking great questions. So when I say a support person, listen, we need our support people in our world. Right. So it's not about putting down support people or that's a less than. It wasn't that. I felt very empowered as a support person. I felt I was in my zone of genius being a support person because I was really good at it, and I really enjoy working with people and taking their visions and bringing it into the real world. So Carrie, where she helped me was I was always answering to somebody. She helped me see, well, instead of answering to somebody, what can you create and what can you do to support the person you were hired to take their business to the next level from a support person and also a leadership position. So it's like looking more strategically, having harder conversations with people who weren't necessarily doing their work to the level we needed them to do. How do you grow people? In my former job, I never had that opportunity to do it. So here's a woman who did that, and she was able to support me on that.
I think you bring up a really interesting point that's a challenge for the coaches and parents that are listening, is you talked about having harder conversations, which is, I feel like, a necessary and a must, and something that I've been thinking about because I just had tryouts for, Venice High School basketball, and there's, a lot of players on the team, and not every player on the team is going to have that same play time that they may have aspirations for in their head. So when you talk about those challenging conversations, what did you first learn or maybe unlearn from the importance of having challenging conversations?
The first thing that I really had to get, okay with was that I didn't have to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there was a part of me like, okay, there's so much prep I have to do inside myself because, I'm such in my former life, more of a people pleaser. I didn't want anybody mad at me or anything like that. So when I started shifting the mindset that this conversation is in support of the person, I'm not responsible for how they respond necessarily back to it, but it's like I'm responsible for my tone, my energy, and how I'm delivering it. And if I hold that this is in support of them and I care enough about them to have the conversation, that made it easier. Instead of like, I'm going to avoid this, it will work out itself. I'm not, a lot of people I coach in the executive world want to kind of live in the land of denial a little bit. Like, the problem will go away. Well, maybe, and why not just confront it? I like calling it carefrontation versus confrontation. Yeah. So
yeah, that's a cool way to put a spin on it. And I think in terms of my short, kind of experience when it comes to coaching, when it comes to just my personal life as well, when I feel like I avoid a problem, like I may avoid it for a year, maybe 2 years, or even a couple months, but it always comes back if we don't carefront it or, have those conversations. And I think, one of the things is that I really liked that you talked about was the delivery and tone.
Yes.
And the importance of, you're doing it with love and care, right? And I'm not just doing it like, let's say I have a player who may not get a lot of play time. I'm not going to put them down. You stink, like you're not going to play, right? It's like, look, if I'm going to be honest right now, these are what you have to work on if you want to get play time. Yeah. But at the moment, you probably are not going to get as much play time as you want. It might be 0 minutes, maybe 2 minutes. And just having that conversation, it's not and I think this is something that has been my biggest challenge and area of growth as a coach and as a person as well, is I like that you said it's not my responsibility for how they react.
Right. And that's, we're not really taught that. Like, we're responsible, again, in the delivery and how we show up in our leadership. That's one thing we can control. But I could talk to one person and they won't have a problem with it. And then I could talk to another person and they could get totally triggered. Is that me? Or it's like, one of the things I teach in the coaching too is like, if you get triggered by something, you already have like a hurt somewhere inside of you. That is just pushing up against. So, and I think that's what I learned a lot in coaching too. I can go into a lot of over responsibility for people. In the past, I did a lot of that, taking on their upset, that's my fault. And I've kind of had to unpack that and untether that. And that happened through the coaching. Wow.
That's really powerful. And I think that's something that I want to continue to work on, right? Because I think one thing that we always talk about together is like we always want to continue to grow as leaders, right? We have that growth mindset. We don't want to always be in the same place. And so can you talk about a specific time or maybe share a specific story of when you had to kind of approach someone who may have had a certain reaction to feedback that you had given them?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that a story that came to mind when you were saying that kind of popped in. I was director of a coaching school out here in LA that I help one of my best friends. It's amazing. She's kicking ass in it. Okay, hopefully I can swear. It's okay.
It's all good.
And I really got to the place where I was kind of done being the director and I was looking to do other things with my work, and I was really concerned to have that conversation with her because I know her dream was, we're going to do this until I'm done, and I and I want to support people so much in their dreams. So it took months To be honest with you, it took months working with my coach, talking about it, just to really to be okay with honoring my truth. And I know it was hard for her. Like, she was very professional and supported me. And because sometimes you're going to have that, like, what we think might be the worst case scenario is usually not how it usually plays out. And if it does, like, I had one woman I had to tell at my former company that we weren't going to use her anymore, and she had a pretty strong reaction. And I just really had to go inside myself and just say to myself, this is not me. She's upset. This is hard news for her. I just moved into compassion, and that helped. And she still left mad. Right. And what can you do? It's I had to learn, like, just, it's okay, it's not my responsibility, and I did the best I could.
Right, it's out of our control.
Right.
And I think one of the things that you said was interesting that I want to kind of dive more into is you talked about how you were talking about yourself, or like approaching yourself. Like, I think a lot of conversations, I actually was going back and forth with one of my friends who I had on the podcast last year, just on Instagram. He's a science teacher, Andy Baronilla. If you want to avoid burnout, that's a great episode to listen to. He was kind of talking about, what he's seeing in his students is, and what he wants to, when I'm going to bring him back on the show, he wants to talk about a lot of students are having a lot of, kind of negative self-talk. Yeah. And I think that's something that we worked on together. Not that I had, bad self-talk. I feel like I've always been on maybe the more positive side, but I've just been learning, like, even this weekend when I worked at a shooting college, they were kind of talking about a study that was done, that if you think a negative thought, it's 3 times more likely to happen. And then if you say that negative thought out loud, like, I think I'm going to miss the next shot, it's 10 times more likely to that you'll miss the next shot. Yes. Or whatever that thought is. So can you talk about how, kind of that self-talk has really helped you form your leadership in coaching?
Sure. So one of the things, I have my master's degree in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. And one of the things they taught us is that we almost have like 2 voices in our head.
Right.
We have the inner critic, and then what I call is the voice of love. And so the inner critic tends to be the ego, and the voice of love, if you're doing it from a spiritual psychology point of view, is the soul. So not everybody has to believe that, and we do all have that voice in us that is like, loves you so hard, wants the best for you. So I had, with the coaching, I had a really my coach would slow me down a lot, even with all my training. And I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I mean, I got my master's degree over 20 years ago. I still can get caught up in that.
Right.
And having a coach go, Amy, you're kind of like, you're being really hard on yourself right now. Mm-hmm. And I'd be like, oh, it kind of like wakes me up, because I think it's very easy for us to fall asleep to it. Yeah. It can be very intoxicating, that voice. It can be very like, you think it's so right.
Right.
And I really work with people being like, well, let's listen to the other voice, because the other voice deserves as much airtime as the inner critic. And I used to think too, like, well, if I'm not hard on myself, who is going to be hard on myself?
Right.
And my coach would be like, why does anybody need to be hard on you?
Right.
And I was like, that's a good point. Because I actually do more things for myself when it comes from more of a voice of love than that part that is always like trying to keep me small and safe and okay. And I just really pay attention to which voice is operating.
That's a really good point. A couple of things come to mind. I think number one, we were talking about having conversations this weekend at the shooting college, and the presenter at the time was saying, like, a lot of us are our own worst critic, but are you your number one fan, right? And so if you're going to be your worst critic, you have to be your number one fan at the same time, and then feed that number one fan, right? And, I think about a parable that John Gordon wrote about, like, feeding the positive dog, like, kind of the simple story of just, like, what you feed kind of comes true. And I honestly feel like the work that we've been doing together, just kind of to share, like, I've been kind of focusing on serving. I think one of the things that helps me the most is the more I give, the more I receive, and just like listening to my affirmations every single day of what I'm shooting for is like, it helps reprogram. Sometimes I like to joke with myself, I'm almost brainwashing myself, right? Yeah. But like, I think that sometimes, can be looked at as cheesy, but I feel like it's something that actually really does help. And a lot of times they like kind of the cheesy things that are not cool to do. I think that specifically when it comes to like giving high fives and teammates and being a great teammate and good energy, you can feel that, right? It feels maybe a little uncomfortable at first, but that really does raise the, kind of performance of a team. So can you talk about when it comes to, a lot of feeding the positive side of thoughts and how that affects, kind of human performance, whether it's at work or even in personal lives?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can walk into a room and I can just feel if somebody's like not in a good space.
Right.
And that happens at work a lot too, right? Or even with a team. Like you see somebody's off in a bad corner. I mean, it's not like we're all here like, let's smile forever and that's good. But if you're attuned to what's happening around you, then it gives you more information. And then when you have more information, it's like awakening to the idea that I have choice here.
Okay.
I have choice as a leader how I'm going to walk into the room and inspire people. And I just posted on Instagram the other day, there was a video of this CEO who was like, ever since COVID, nobody wants to work anymore and we need to lay off more people so they get in line and they feel like we owe them and they owe us because and I was like, oh my God, hashtag bad leadership. His energy was so demeaning and took dignity. Like he was like, I'm like, does he think people are robots? Like we're all here. I hope I'm answering your question. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent here, but his energy and he was demeaning.
Yeah.
That was the vibe coming off of it. And it wasn't just me watching him. It was what he was saying and doing. So I think it's really important as leaders that we really attune to our energy, how we're delivering things. There's a thing called be, do, have that comes out of landmark education where how we're being creates to what we're doing, which then creates to what we have. So everything comes from that place of being. And, really, like you said, for people in the audience, what I had Justin do is create affirmation statements, like I am statements, where he's seeing himself like he really wants to grow his business and take it to the next level and really support all the athletes, and really powerful. And I had him write the statement and he listens to the audio every day. And there is a thing with, creating different neural pathways, like our, however we've grown up or what we've been exposed to creates its own neural pathways. Well, if I want this for myself in the future, what do I need to say to myself to start taking action around it and start believing that I am the person that could achieve that? And just hearing that over and over, there's lots of books on this, but our conscious mind influences the subconscious mind. So whatever you're saying in your conscious mind, the subconscious mind goes, okay. Yeah. So if it's like you said, like, oh, I'm so stupid, subconscious goes, okay, you're stupid.
Right.
And then that creates its own reality. But if you're telling your subconscious, like, I'm a strong leader, I am attracting people to my basketball camps, and I'm really serving at a high level, the subconscious goes, okay. And then you start taking action around those. And that's where it's not really woo-woo land. It's really the subconscious helping you take actions toward what you want.
Right. The actions are not woo-woo. That's real. Right. That's
exactly.
Real. You start feeling that. You feel like the leader, because you talked about being and then doing, right? When you act like that, when you have those thoughts in your head, you start to act like it, the leader or like the servant leader. And I think I honestly have a bad example for myself. The other day I was just shooting and I was kind of frustrated because I'm kind of making a little change, and I went back to some bad habits, and I'm like, all right, let me just try telling myself, you got the next, like, you're going to make the next shot. And then I made the next 3 shots. It was so weird, so bizarre, I was kind of like, of course, like I practiced this in my like business life. Why would this not work for me, just practicing shooting, which is just for fun for me. And now at this point too, I do want to kind of go back before we go into kind of the affirmations and self-leadership. I think I want to touch on an important topic that I feel like a lot of coaches, are challenged with, because I feel like coaches want control. And I feel like I'm not a parent, but I can assume that parents may want control when it comes to, right, when they put people down, demean, or like, that leader that you're talking about, they want to, I feel like that comes from a place of, I want to control these workers so they can work for me and my company
Right.
for as long as, time, and I don't have to, whatever, pay them what they're worth, but that's probably a whole nother conversation. With that being said, can you talk about the importance of celebrating versus constant criticism as a coach and a leader for, obviously athletes, but just as a coach and mentor?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience so far on the planet, most people just want to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
Right? They just want to be seen and heard. So another way of doing that is through acknowledgement. And that's what pulls people, I think it just pulls people toward their potential more than the criticism, because the criticism is activating the inner critic.
Right.
And then it's like, then all the focus is on what they're doing wrong. Now, course correction is important, right? It's like, if my son's running in the street, I'm not going to be like, oh, honey, you're doing such a good job running across the street. I'd be like, no, get out of the street.
Right.
As coaches, it's important, as in the type of coaching you do and in the type of coaching I do, it's important for me to call out what I'm seeing. Now, the client doesn't have to agree with it. They're also not paying me to be their friend. They're paying me because they want to go to the next level.
Right.
And if I see something that could potentially be harming, or that might be a little strong, but I want to call out like, hey, I'm seeing you in your pattern again. And that pattern isn't going to get you what you say you want.
Right.
So it's, it's like an art,
Yeah, it is an art.
It's not a, like, you do the, you walk into a session with something, and sometimes it takes us in another direction.
Right.
So it's really just attuning to your client, and I think most people are really craving somebody really seeing them. And I think we need to see the whole person, not just I don't look at people like, you didn't come into my coaching practice because you needed fixing. Right. It was like, no, I invited you into my coaching practice. I was like, Justin's going to go somewhere, and I think I can really help him because I've already walked part of your path already. Yeah. And so my job was like just to, I just wanted to partner with you in that, and to help you start following that path. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's my experience as your coach.
Let me just double check that that's
going.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, did it stop?
I think it's still going, but...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're still going.
Oh, okay,
I just wanted to double check, so...
See, things happen, and then you have to have you got to pivot.
Right, so I think I really appreciate, you inviting me into that space. And so with that, you talked about how coaches can really see into people's potential, and I feel like what you just said about me has really inspired and helped guide and mentor me for how I want to see my athletes, right? I don't want to meet I do want to meet athletes where they are. I do want to ask them, how's your day at school, right? I do want to meet them where they're at with skill-wise, because that's reality, but I also want to see like where their potential is. And to me, right, I rebranded to Beyond the Game Basketball while I was working with you, because I feel more passionately about helping people become leaders beyond the game of basketball, beyond teaching them how to shoot a basketball. I love basketball. I love coaching it. I love the offense, the X's and O's. I love, helping people be able to become better basketball players. That's awesome. But what's more important to me is helping athletes, actually just people, reach their potential. Like, that's what it's always kind of been about, is human development and talking about untapped potential. So can you talk about how, share any stories of recognizing, potential within your own self, and then how you started to recognize that within, the people you had the opportunity to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell a recent story with my coach, Amber. So my husband, John, and I, we've lived out here in Los Angeles since 1994, and we've never owned our own home. And the mindset was, we'll never be able to afford a home in Los Angeles. For anybody who doesn't live in Los Angeles, the market's pretty expensive here. It's probably just a little. It's like, I mean, I think we're right below either San Francisco or New York, but we're in the top three. We're in the top three,
baby.
And, John and I, we did a lot of work on ourselves personally, so we put a lot of our money toward personal growth and getting our master's degree and stuff like that. So anyhow, I'm 55 right now. So this was like 2 years ago. So I was 53. And I've been feeling really called to buy our own home. And I kept saying to Amber, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And she just like kind of was like, yes, you can. Yeah. Like she was very strong, in a very loving way. But and she's like, well, let's talk about how we're going to change your mindset around this and start creating it. Because I really got clear, like I was feeling depressed that I couldn't do it. And that's the thinking. One of the things I usually work with is I can't do this. I can't do this. So I started changing that narrative to I can do this and I need to plan. And it was wild. Once I kind of opened myself to the possibility that year, like my income went from like $150,000 to $350,000.
Wow.
Like, and I don't want to say like out of the blue, like all these things started coming toward me that helped me we were able to save for a down payment. And at that time, John wasn't even he just left his job of 20 years. I was making so much money. He was able to quit his job because he was there for 20 years. I'm like, if you're going to do this, do it now. And we were able to come up with a down payment and we bought a house in North Hollywood that we didn't move into it because John was supposed to get a job on the east side of LA, but it didn't work out. And now we use it as an Airbnb and we make money off the Airbnb. So it's just changing that I can't to I can.
Yeah.
And how can I create it has been a game changer in my life. My parents had I love my parents. They did the best they could. They did a lot and did for me. But there was always like a mentality of we can't afford things. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing we would say over and over. Well, we can't afford to do that. We can't afford to do that. And I told John, through one of my coaches, I said, we have to start saying, how can we create this? Because the brain hears, oh, well, let's do that.
Yeah.
Versus, oh, we can't afford it. The answer inside me is like, you're right.
Right.
And then we wouldn't get anywhere.
So starting with that I can, and then moving, I think even more importantly, you have to have a plan of action, right?
Right.
You just talked about that as well. You can't just wish all these things and then not take any action, right?
No.
Like you can't just think and grow rich as they talk about in Napoleon Hill. You have to, right, be first, like, kind of embody kind of the mindset and then do.
Right.
So with that, I kind of want to touch on, the financial aspect of things, because I know it's something that we don't talk about a ton here on the podcast, but I actually do feel like it's really important, and it's been really important for me, and since we had that conversation, because I have a similar thing where it's like, obviously I'm living here in Los Angeles, I have some, luxuries when it comes to finances, just of my like backing, I guess, and my foundation, so to speak, for a 25-year-old, but like I just kind of had this mindset around certain amounts of money that I can only make, can I get a gym? But now I'm like really into it, and now I'm kind of breaking in, I'm not literally breaking into gyms, but I'm, making progress in terms of finding a gym, at a budget-friendly price in Venice. That's what I listen to every morning, so it kind of comes up to me. Can you talk about how, like, one of the things that you kind of shifted with in terms of finances? Because I feel like everyone kind of goes through this, and we had this conversation before, where it's, sometimes it can feel like, I know for me, right, like I just graduated from University of Oregon 2020. College campuses are quite, anti-money, right? I don't want to make money. I'm going to be a bad person if I make money or I charge people a service. And so that was probably one of the biggest like monkeys to kind of go off my back right away. So can you talk about that experience for you?
Yeah, so the biggest shift I did, now I grew up, my mom worked at a Dairy Queen for 30 years. I would consider middle class, lower middle class.
Yeah.
My dad had a good job until he was let go of his job. That was right when I was in college, and my parents did not pay for my college. I was the first person to go to college in my family, and so, long story short, I read a book called Overcoming Under-Earning by Barbara Stanny. She's married now, so it's Barbara Hudson, and she had I said, if you want to make more money in your life, you buy Barbara's book and you do every single exercise in that book. Because it was brought out so much awareness and so much, I had all that judgment. You're not a spiritual person if you're rich. Rich people are selfish. Right. I mean, I could tell you, I could make a whole list of it. And when I started unpacking that and realized what was because a lot of those were unconscious until they came to the light. And then when they come to the light, you can't unsee it. And then I had to get really honest with myself. I'm like, this is getting me in the way to live a life of my dreams and live a life of, to take just care of my family. You know, I have a son in college, and my youngest is in high school, and he's going to be going to college soon. And I didn't have anybody pay for my college. So it's like, how am I going to, I want to help them.
Right.
And I have to get into a new mindset around that. So doing Barbara's book and really getting at, money is neutral. It really is. Like, it's like this stone. Like, you know, it's what we decide the value is. It does have value.
Yeah.
And again, how am I going to relate to it? Because it's like how we relate to the issue is the issue. So if I relate to it, money is bad, it's bad. If I relate to as money is good, it's good. Because I get to choose how I want to relate to it, how I want to use it. My intention is to use money in a positive way, an affirming way for the people in my life. And I had to get at those underlying limiting beliefs that were kind of, you know, keeping me stuck in that place. Like, I can't get a nice house. I'm going to have to live in an apartment here in LA for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before I kind of dive in there, I want to just kind of give you an opportunity right now for those that are listening, you know, that are like, you know, money is obviously one of the biggest topics in every single household, right?
Totally.
And I want to get into kind of the investment it is for college, and, you know, if you want to play college athletics, I want to get there. But before we get there, I want to just give you an opportunity to share some resources for those that are listening, so that they can, you know, could potentially, because this isn't a financial podcast, but I also would love to, you know, provide resources for the parents and coaches that are listening and do want more information.
I mean, Barbara's book is the biggest book I recommend to everybody. Most people, even my friend Carolyn, who she started her coaching school. It's one of the reads in for the coaches growing their business, because if we don't handle our money stuff, because money is one of the biggest arguments couples have. Yeah. You know, it can feel very scary. We can feel like, oh my God, we need money to live. Right. So it's like, it goes up against our survival mechanism inside of ourselves. So I would start with Barbara Stanny's book, Overcoming Under-Earning. And then she also has another book called Sacred Success, which takes overcoming under-earning and takes it up the next notch. Okay. So, but do overcoming under-earning first. Trying to think who else. There's a really good book. I can't remember the author's name at the moment, but it's called The Soul of Money. The Soul of Money. And she talks about in the book, there's millionaires that think they're poor. Yeah. You know, it's like, 10 million's not enough. It's like, many people's money issues, there's not enough. There's not enough. And then you have you'll hear the stories of somebody who was a janitor and saved $1 million, you know, and then gave it away. It's like, again, we all get to decide how we want to use it. And, you know, I think looking at our limiting beliefs is the best way. And Barbara's book is the best one I know that can really help with that. Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I think, you know, there's a saying that kind of goes around, money just magnifies your character, right? Yeah. So if you're a great person, right, like my dad's a listener, and I'm just going to shout my dad out here. Hi, Dad. Because, he's always there. He's always listening. You know, as a construction company, he's donated to everything. My 8th grade Catalina trip, you know, our Little League baseball, the scoreboard at my high school, right? Like, he had a successful construction business, but he's chosen to donate. And that's a lot of good, because one of the things that I've kind of had some experience with it in terms of nonprofits, right? It's great to have a nonprofit and want to give those services, and nonprofits are very important, but guess what? They need money too. Yeah. So they have to go fundraise. So if I can make, you know, opportunities, you know, if I can create a business where you are investing in your athlete's development, leadership wise, confidence, right? Like, obviously basketball skills to me is like probably the least important, you know, skill that I'm really, you know, providing, because I know I've talked to, you know, parents like yourself and other parents that have, you know, told me like their athlete is more confident, right? And I feel like that confidence will help them when they go to college or trade school or become an entrepreneur for, you know, kind of whatever they end up doing. It's an investment. Like, you are investing in your athletes, whether you're a coach, you're a parent, and you have to have money to be able to make those investments. So I think that's just something that's so important, is
kind of viewing things as investments instead of expenses.
Yes. And my oldest son is in college, and before he left, he said, you and Dad have supported me so well emotionally. Can you also support me financially now?
That's awesome.
And I was like, okay, we've done a good job on the emotional level, and now, but and to call it out too, I know I have a lot of privilege,
right.
and I am very conscious of that. So I think it's important. What's that thing about Spider-Man? With great
power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that money can have a lot of power to it. And again, how we want to use it.
Absolutely. So kind of gearing back towards just kind of a broader leadership sense as we kind of enter our fourth quarter of our conversations, I like to say, when it comes to leadership, what do you think, for those that are listening, what are would be the 1, 2, 3 action steps that if you were going to give advice to those listening who want to level up their leadership, do after this episode?
I think the first thing is to really slow down. And when I say slow down, just get quiet. You don't have to meditate for an hour. You don't have to meditate for 30 minutes. It's not that. But when we slow down and get quiet, that's when that other voice, the voice of love, kind of gets its time. Because the other voice kind of settles, and then this other voice can come more to the surface. So I think getting quiet, and then the second thing is really, really write down what your vision is. Put your vision out a year from now, or 3 years from now, 10 years, depending on where you're at in your life, and go, what do I want? And it's not just material things. It's more like, what do you want happening inside of you? Meaning, if you've been sad or depressed or you've gone through an episode of grief, it's like, what support do you need to put in place for yourself? How do you want to relate to yourself? And that also gets put down on the piece of paper. So having a vision is really important. And then I think one of the top 3 things next would be is use your creativity.
Yeah.
I think that can sound kind of cliche. Use your creativity, but that was what, when we wanted to get that house, I had to get really creative. And another coach I work with, Steve Chandler, who I adore, and he was one of my first coaches too. He said, Amy, your business will do well the more you access your creativity. Because that's where I get all my inspiration from. That's where I feel like when I talk about a workshop and I'm creative about it, I get so excited about it. And then that gets, people get drawn to that. Their enthusiasm, I don't think it gets said enough that our enthusiasm really means spirit.
Yeah.
And so the more I'm sharing more from my authentic self and more what I get excited about and my joy, that's what calls people toward me. Like how you are about basketball, and I think the kids really pick up on your energy and they know you're there for them. And you can't say enough about really paying attention to your energy and how you're being is what. Again, this is not about being perfect, because we're humans and we're going to have our low moments and upset moments. And it goes a long way. It goes a long way. And the more conscious we are of it, the more we can have impact.
Yeah, our energy, just to pick up on that, it makes a huge impact. And I can, share something. We're not always going to feel, that 100%, spirit of showing up every single day. But I can kind of give a recent example for myself. I did not feel very well this weekend, and the shooting college through PGC actually, they demand a lot of spirit, a lot of energy. That's their S in shape, which is their principle. So it's a lot of fun. And so it's a very tiring experience. So I knew one of the things that I could do is just ask questions, right? Just, I'm a big on high fives, daps, and just asking questions. What school do you go to? Siblings, just little things. I knew I couldn't bring the typical I can bring a lot of emotional energy, but I knew that my energy would shift, but it was still in a way of serving others and getting in, basically saying, actually it's so funny that you talk about everyone wants to be seen and heard, because one of the running jokes this weekend that Dustin Aubert, he is one of the directors there. He said the greatest leader he ever knew was someone who just rode the bench on his college team, and all he did was say, "I see you," and, you know, he'd just get excited. He didn't play any time at all, but he lifted his entire team up because he'd get the most excited for people. He would just say, "I see you," and I'm sure plenty of other things that we probably could say on this podcast, and maybe other things we couldn't say on it, but just like excitement for others. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that, you know, is important for leadership.
Yeah, and I think honoring people's dignity is so important. I don't think people talk about it enough. It's, you know, somebody at work, right? And they're doing their best job, and then they have a leader come in and be like, why didn't you do it this way? Or what's going on here? And then the leader could have said, wow, I've really been seeing you really working really hard, and I really appreciate that. And I need to give you a feedback on this piece of information. Right. Which one would you respond better to?
Right, the latter, of course.
Exactly. And people are like, I don't have time to talk to people nicely. I don't have time.
Yeah.
I don't have time. Well, you spent the time being negative and not inspiring, so why not shift? It's like, and again, I think it's important for the listeners to know, I'm really talking about not reacting to life, but being more proactive. Yeah. And I think in my past too, I tend to be like, well, whatever life gives me. Right. And it's like, life will meet me at my point of action too. Yeah. So I have being a leader in one's life is also taking responsibility, which if people really slow down that word, responsibility really only means the ability to respond. If you pull apart the word, that's what it means. It's the ability to respond. And we have choice on what that looks like. A lot of times we don't think because they made me mad and it's their fault. And like, that's giving a lot of power over to other people. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and being like, wow, I should have done that.
Right.
I don't want to be I'm going to have some regrets. And the more I can get conscious of the ones, I can slow that down and not have that happen.
Right. You're creating your life. I think that's what I really hear. You're proactive when it comes to what you're going for, especially when it came to, right, like if you want to buy a house in Los Angeles, you cannot react to that, right? No. You can't react to your numbers every single month because you're just probably going to be spending too much or not earning enough, or probably a combination of both because you're not actively creating it. And I think you touch on a good point is like, it's your responsibility, right? It's not anyone else's responsibility to do that, unfortunately. I mean, it is, I guess buying a house in LA aside, whatever you're like, for me, it's not your responsibility to grow BTG basketball. You're my coach, but you don't do that. Actually, you help mentor me and help me become a better leader and help me become more responsible. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to provide a great, service and product for my athletes to develop. If my athletes aren't developing, it's not your fault, right? I mean, I think just taking that responsibility is huge, and one of the things that I'm trying to work on as well is sometimes I can kind of be reactionary whether it's like, I'm driving and someone cuts me off and I get frustrated, right? Like, that's my choice to get frustrated. Yeah. Like, I understand we're in LA. There's going to be a bunch of terrible drivers always, and if there's not, probably no one's on the road. Right. So just having those choices, and I think I really appreciate everything you've done for me in that regard in terms of like how you've helped me develop. And so for those that are listening and watching and want to potentially, contact and reach out to you, I know you have great programs and opportunities. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
I would, the best way to reach out to me would be my website. So that's Amy Hruby, and my last name is H. I know, I have to explain my last name a lot. So it'd be AMYHRU, B as in boy, Y.com. So it has all my contact information on there, any programs that I'm offering, talks about my one-on-one coaching too. And that would be the best way to get a hold of me. Or contact Justin. He knows too.
Either way, we can go both ways. So I really appreciate you coming on. It's a lot of fun, obviously, having a conversation in terms of, two coaches talking instead of, me coaching, and I get the opportunity to showcase what I've learned. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Justin. You're doing awesome.
Let's go.
Yay. That was fun. That went fast.
I know, it went by so fast.
Hopefully I made sense what I was saying.